Hope you've enjoyed a little bit of downtime. And obviously, we're right up against the start of the college football quarterfinal round games tomorrow night in Arlington and 3 games on Thursday. Let's discuss Texas Tech and Oregon, what it means for Tech, obviously, what the kind of year they've had, and what does this mean? Anything in particular as well for the Big 12 to get, since TCU, a playoff win?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you think about the Big 12's reputation on the national stage right now, it has been as a conference that hasn't won the games at the highest levels. And, I think that it's a little unfortunate that TCU's win over Michigan gets erased the way that it does, but obviously the way that they finished the season certainly has a way to do with that as well. So I think it's a big game for the conference. I think it's a big game for Texas Tech. And when I look at this matchup, it is a really good one, probably the best matchup of the quarterfinal round. Two teams that absolutely have the upside of winning the national championship. Maybe the fastest team in college football in Oregon against the most physical up front in Texas Tech. You look at that Texas Tech front seven especially. I think it's as good as any in college football. And it's going to be an interesting challenge to see how they match up with an Oregon team that really has only been slowed down once this year.
Shehan, right now, Oregon's slight favorites. I think it's like 2 or 3 points last I looked. What to you makes them the favorite heading into this game?
Well, I think that for bettors especially, right, they're a more proven commodity. They've been on this stage before. They've been in the college football playoff. They've won games against elite level teams. But I think that some of this is also, I guess, what you could call brand bias, right? Like this is, I think, people being more familiar and comfortable with Oregon as a betting favorite than Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech, look, the thing that you have to say about it, right, is like they haven't played one of these elite level teams as yet. Oregon has, and they lost that game against Indiana earlier this year. So how is Texas Tech going to match up against a team that's as fast as Oregon? Right? Are they going to be playing from behind the 8 ball? Will they be able to create explosive plays against an Oregon secondary that's really, really fast? I think that's a legitimate question, but I think that what isn't a legitimate question is that they're going to be able to match up physically, especially, again, I go back to that front seven. I think that they're going to be able to control the line of scrimmage on the defensive side as well as any team that Oregon has played this year, and I include Indiana in that. So it makes sense to me that Oregon's a slight favorite, but I actually think that Texas Tech is being undervalued.
Shehan, do you like the timing of when we've seen the games from the first round to this round to eventually semifinals and championship, or would you like to see just a little bit tighter, knowing the TV schedule, et cetera, has a lot to do with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that going all the way into late January is a little too late for me, right? Like, I think that, I think it was Joey McGuire actually said it best, like, this is supposed to be a fall semester sport. It's not supposed to bleed into the spring semester, and that's what it's doing by going all the way to January 19th. Now, I'll tell you selfishly, my daughter was born on January 19th, and when she was born, I thought that that was after the season was over. I thought I was in good shape. Obviously, this year now, it's the date of the national championship game, but I think that college football is a game that's meant to culminate in so many ways on New Year's Day. Of course, we've always had maybe one additional week on top of that, but to go 2 or 3 weeks on top of that, it is a lot. And there are logistical hurdles to deal with, of course. And I mean, the biggest thing is that college football can't consistently go up against the NFL. We saw that obviously with these first round games, they kind of tossed 2 to the side because the NFL is able to play on Saturday. So I wish it could wrap up a little bit quicker and more efficiently than it does. But also, I mean, again, this is part of the blessing and curse of having a bigger field.
Shehan, there's been so much hand-wringing about just the state of everything, but even, when we play the games, the existence of bowls and how those look. But I don't know about you, man. I really enjoy that Pop Tarts Bowl. I mean, they've got something there. That was a hell of a game, a hell of an ending there with BYU's big win. I thought Houston LSU was very entertaining. Like, what sort of stood out to you outside of the big picture talk as far as, hey, it is still college football bowl season. It's not what it was 5-10 years ago, certainly not 20, but there's still been some fun things along the way.
Well, I think that the thing that always stands out to me is when bowl games end and when bowl season ends, it's like how much I feel like, oh, well, that was fun. That doesn't feel that different than it did before. And yeah, I mean, obviously LSU didn't have a number of players playing in that game against Houston, but like, I think that you leave that game going like, well, Houston was a 10-win team. They got to beat LSU in their last game. That was great for them. I don't feel any different about it than I did maybe a couple of years ago, right? Like, and I think that the lead up to it, you sort of feel like, oh my gosh, it's such a damper that X or Y won't be playing in this game. And when you turn on the games, it just doesn't seem to matter that much. I mean, again, I think that the big thing is like, if you are, well, first of all, if you're a gambler, like, yeah, there's not a whole lot that you can necessarily go off of when you're trying to pick these games. That is definitely something that's a little difficult. And a lot of the top players certainly are not involved in these games. But I think that the other side of this is that you do get to see a glimpse into the future. You get to see, you know, whether it's young quarterbacks stepping into the moment, whether it is young playmakers stepping up. Like, I think that all feels very much the same to me. I think that it feels really, really cool, frankly. And so I think that some of this stuff is just, again, we go several weeks without having games to talk about, and we almost sometimes just need something to talk about. And so we talk about the death of bowl games or the sport breaking or all this stuff. Again, I think that, you know, again, I left that BYU versus Georgia Tech game really, really excited about college football and feeling like, man, that was a really cool moment for this sport. And I totally acknowledge, like, not every single one of them feels like it. There were certainly games between power conference opponents where it felt like every single player was gone. It was very bad quality of play. But I think that I leave most of these bowl games thinking that was a lot of fun, and that's really all it's meant to be.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, man. Really enjoyed that Pop Tarts Bowl. Like they just nailed something there that's pretty special. And Houston LSU was a lot of fun. I do wonder, and I know a lot of us get sponsored by these types, but I do wonder if you eliminated like the gambling element from the discussion, like the motivation for that, of how different a lot of the discussion would be. Do you agree with that?
I think that that's definitely real, right? Like, I think that is such an overarching part of the sport right now that, you know, again, one thing that's kind of killed me a little bit as somebody who covers the sport nationally is that it feels like people care less and less about players than they ever have before in terms of learning their stories, getting to grow up with them. And again, it's because they aren't staying as long as they are. But like, I think that this sort of gambling, you know, overarching thing is a big part of the narrative of the sport. And it does make the sport more unpredictable, in some ways a bad way, when you don't even know who's going to be playing in some of these games. And so, no, I definitely think that's part of the conversation. I think that there's a group of people certainly who only watch the bowl games to, you know, to gamble on them. But, you know, I think, again, as somebody who doesn't gamble, frankly, like, there also is kind of fun in the unpredictability of it, right? In the not knowing and the seeing, hey, who's going to be motivated for this game? Who's going to be ready for this game? And, you know, so for me, like, I think that there's sort of a different kind of game within that as well.
I think it was last football season, someone who normally would just get like entrenched knowing all the names and personalities and where they're from said to me they just don't care about that anymore, because by the time they get hooked up to somebody, guess what? They're in the portal. It's like there's mercenaries. And so they weren't really, they just lost that touch of reality with college football as a fan of actually the players themselves.
No, and I think that part is absolutely real. And I do think that some of that's going to be temporary, right? Eventually, we're going to reach a point where we have players who are signed to, whether it's multi-year contracts or whatever it is. I think that we're going to have more limitations, but some of that stuff is going to have to be maybe collectively bargained or something like that. The other thing, too, is that this was a super active coach carousel, and that's something that really does trigger second and third and fourth levels of transfer as well. I mean, it's something that goes all the way down the food chain when every one of the American Conference leaders are losing their coaches, and then they go and hire from, you know, another group of conferences. And, you know, so I think that this was an especially bad year, and I'm hopeful certainly that eventually we get to a point where that doesn't happen. Now, is it ever going to completely go away? I don't think so, as long as there's sort of this free transfer rule where there's no sitting out or anything like that. But I do think it is going to improve over the years. And I mean, again, the thing is, too, there are multiple programs that have managed to hang on to players. Like, I look even at this past year, right? Sawyer Robertson, Josh Cameron, Bryson Washington, they stick around at Baylor, just as an example. And I think that in years like that, you're going to have longer stories. You do have more opportunities because of the money as well to create those opportunities, but we have to, I think, reach a little bit more of a standardization for this sport to really make much sense.
So I know we've got those other games to get to, but I do want to know your opinion on Kyle Whittingham. I know you've written about it, spoken about it on social media, but for our audience, your thoughts on how this all worked out so well for Michigan, and now this very interesting storyline where Utah goes, wait, I thought you were retiring. What is this all about? Just crazy how this all worked out for the Wolverines.
Yeah, I mean, here's the funny thing about it, right, is that it was literally 2019 was when they named a head coach in waiting in Morgan Scalley, because Kyle Whittingham said, I don't know that I'm going to do this forever. And now apparently he wants to do this forever. Yeah. But I think that it was an absolutely perfect decision by Michigan. I said it even at the time that this happened. They're not going to be able to go through a normal coaching search, right? They're not going to be able to find a long-term option because most of the long-term options have either, one, moved this cycle, or two, signed major contracts to stay with their schools. So unless you were going to go in and pay a huge amount of money to break a contract with Clark Lee or Kenny Dillingham or Brent Key or one of these coaches, like the reality was these guys just weren't going to be available to you. So to get somebody who I expect will be a 3 to 4 year stopgap, I think is a really smart decision. Whatever you want to say about Kyle Whittingham, like he is going to be a coach who leaves the program in better shape in 3 or 4 years than it is right now. They'll be able to make a more natural transition. They'll be able to have a real search on schedule, and they'll absolutely have a very talented and committed and culturally sound roster. That's something that Kyle Whittingham has delivered every single year of his coaching career. So total no-brainer to me for Michigan, and I think that it's a really smart decision that they stopped kind of trying to mess around and just went out and did it.
Who ended up with the better after it seemed like they were floundering with a hire? Michigan with Whittingham or Penn State and Matt Campbell?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, two obviously different situations. I think, look, and I'll say this too. I think that if Matt Campbell was still available earlier this cycle, I think that Michigan might have gone for him. What we've kind of heard is that Michigan and Notre Dame and Penn State were some of those programs on his very, very short list that Matt Campbell would have considered. So I'll give the slight edge to Campbell because I think that this is more likely to be a long-term solution, right? I think that he could be a 10 to 20-year coach there if he plays his cards right. Whereas Kyle Whittingham probably not going to be. He's probably going to be a 3 to 5 year sort of solution. But I mean, again, I think that both are going to have a lot of success there. I think that both could have really good teams by the next year or two. And, so again, I think that those were two really smart decisions. And especially when you give the context of Michigan being in this position in late December, that does obviously give some credence to hiring Whittingham as well.
So we talked Oregon, Texas Tech, but the starter tomorrow night, Ohio State and Miami. Buckeyes, big favorites. Miami kind of a chip on their shoulder, sort of like, hey, what up? Like, look at what we did. We get into the playoff. We win our first game. Where is this on kind of your interest list of the 4 games?
Yeah, we're going to figure out really quick whether Miami can hang or not in this game. Because here's the one thing that you have to say is that there was one team that really challenged Ohio State in the trenches this year, and it was Indiana. And they lost that football game. I think that Miami has comparably good trench play to that Indiana team that beat Ohio State. What we don't know at this point is how well they'll be able to generate offense. Now, I don't think it's going to be as bad as it was in that Texas A&M game. That was obviously a very windy game, and the passing game was just a non-factor because of it. But this has been a Miami offense that's been inconsistent. There have been moments where Carson Beck looked like a first-round pick. There's been moments where they've been completely hapless. If they're not able to move the ball against this Ohio State secondary, and if they're not able to go downfield, this is going to be a very long day for Miami. But if they're able to hang strong, I do think that this defense is good enough that they're going to be able to give this Miami team opportunities to stay in this game.
So we mentioned, let's get to that. Alabama, just again, it's Alabama, but Indiana's so good. Did Alabama all of a sudden get something right when they had the comeback win against Oklahoma the way they were down 17-0? Seemed like the defense was starting to make some disruptive plays, which we haven't seen a lot of from them.
Yeah, yes and no. I think that game probably says a lot more about Oklahoma's deficiencies than it does about Alabama's strengths. But I mean, we know that the upside is there, right? Especially when you start talking about that passing game with Ty Simpson and those really good receivers. And I think defensively, again, when they've been locked in, they've been a pretty good team. Not an elite team, but I think a pretty good team. But this Indiana team, I think, is just on another level than Alabama. I think that you look at them in the trenches, I mean, they're going to be able to, in my opinion, completely shut down that Alabama running game and make them one-dimensional. And when Ty Simpson's been pressured, he has struggled mightily as a quarterback. He's turned the ball over. He's made mistakes. He's been inaccurate. I think that that's what we're going to see from Ty Simpson against this Indiana team. And on the other side, look, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the Indiana defense for good reason, but they got the Heisman winner on the other side at quarterback as well. I honestly look at this matchup and I mean, look, maybe this is overstating it. I think that Indiana wins essentially every single positional matchup in this game. Like, they are really, really good. The one thing that you do have to question, they lost their best defensive lineman, Stephen Daly, to a freak injury while he was celebrating after the game, after winning the Big Ten title. They should be okay. They should have enough depth. But, I mean, he is a difference maker of a player. We'll kind of see whether his absence ends up playing a big role.
Sean, don't want to rush you, but I know you're probably short on time, and we are a little bit. So Ole Miss, Georgia, round 2. Do you think this goes differently than round 1 with all of the changes, especially there in Oxford?
I think it goes differently in a real bad way for Ole Miss. I think that Georgia comes out and dominates this game. You know, whenever you have a rematch of two teams, there are two things that I really look at: roster quality and coaching quality. And I get both of those edges to Georgia. I think that this is going to be one of those games where they come out and really blow Ole Miss out of the water right from the get-go. And I do think that Ole Miss is going to fight back and give themselves a chance, but this is just a Georgia team that feels like they're peaking on defense right now. And I think that Ole Miss defense just does not scare you enough to limit Gunnar Stockton and what I still think is a pretty inconsistent Georgia offense. So I think the Dogs win easy. I think that it's not going to be to the level of their rematch against Alabama, but I do think it's not going to be a very close game.
Thank you, buddy. Appreciate it. Happy holidays. Enjoy the week of games, and then we'll discuss them again with you and who gets to the semifinals next Tuesday. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you for having me.